There we go. I don't want to see. There we are. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and welcome to today's brown bag presentation on Humboldt sea level rise. It's a new kind of format, and we're excited to see what you think about it. So we hope that you enjoy the presentation today. We have reopened our offices, and I just wanted to give you that information. The OLLI office is now open Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. So we are on campus, and you can find more information on the safety protocols at campusready.humboldt.edu. OLLI membership is in full swing right now. We have our OLLI membership goes from July to June of each year, and we hope that you will join if you haven't already. We try and reach 1,000 members every year. That's one of the things that the OSHR Foundation requires of the OLLI programs across the country. So we hope that you will join. And I'm happy to say that even since we met last week, we've had almost 100 new members join us. So we hope that if you haven't renewed your membership, you will do so soon. So thank you for being part of OLLI at HSU. We also like to let you know that these brown bag presentations are made possible by the generous support of the Friends of OLLI, and you can sign up and donate at any time. We appreciate every little bit. Thank you to the friends who make these brown bag presentations possible. Also, people often ask if the brown bag presentations are recorded and where you can find those. So if you navigate yourself to the brown bag presentation link on our website, you will find this little statement down here that says, if you missed a presentation, here's how you find it. And we try and get those presentations up within 1 or 2 days of the date of the presentation. So we hope to have this presentation up and available for you to view sometime tomorrow. Also, it is our first day of classes today, so our fall classes are on and going this week. We have lots of new classes starting, and every week throughout the semester. We do appreciate if you enroll in classes early so that we can get that Zoom link to you. And finally, today is the last day for anybody who might be interested in this. This is the Humboldt, or the area, excuse me, ARB has reached out to OLLIs across the nation looking for people who have relocated to communities where OLLI programs are being offered, to see if that was a factor in somebody's decision to move. So if you move to Humboldt County because of our OLLI program, please reach out to me so that we can get you connected with ARB and possibly have an interview and be featured in the article that should be coming out in a few months. Again, today is that last day for anybody who might be in this situation. And if you are, please reach out to me. For now, we ask that you mute yourself. I'm going to have Jane Woodward introduce Aldaron Laird, who is our facilitator today, and then he will let you know how he would like to handle questions. And we just appreciate you being here, and thank you so much for staying connected with OLLI at HSU.
All right, welcome today. We're happy to see you all here. This is the first of a series of public forums to learn more about sea level rise planning and projects in our region. This first forum will feature the Caltrans District 1 Climate Change Adapt branch. Hold on a minute.
All the times.
Yeah, wouldn't you know? Caltrans District 1 Climate Change Adaptation branch Chief Clancy De Smet. I think I just messed that up. Forums will be facilitated by Aldaron Laird, environmental planning consultant. The conversation at this forum will focus on the efforts regarding the Highway 101 corridor sea level rise adaptation planning, stakeholder engagement, and other highway segments vulnerable to sea level rise. The Humboldt State University Sea Level Rise Initiative is a co-sponsor of this and future forum events. Aldaron Laird is an environmental planner. He has prepared sea level rise vulnerabilities assessments and adaptation planning on Humboldt Bay. He hosted several sea level rise workshops, regional planning forum, and OLLI classes on Humboldt Bay. Currently, he is identifying and developing living shoreline opportunities, assisting the county with a regional sea level rise adaptation feasibility study. He co-founded HSU's Sea Level Rise Initiative and currently hosts monthly meetings of the OLLI Sea Level Rise Special Interest Group with Jerry Rohde, historian and ethnogeographer. And we're delighted to have you here, Aldaron. And you mentioned something about thinking about retirement one day. We can't let you do that. So we're happy to have you here.
Thank you very much. So, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yes, good, good. Welcome, everybody. This is something that has been in the works for quite a while to try to put together a Humboldt sea level rise public forum. And I'm really happy that OLLI and HSU has agreed to sponsor this. And I think that you'll really enjoy learning more about sea level rise projects that are happening in our area. I wanted to start off with this image. This is the Tuluwat World Renewal Ceremonial Site for the Willets tribe. It's in the center of the bay. And this is during one of our king tides, an average king tide. You can see the shell midden delineated there in the water. But we live right in the heart of Willets ancestral waters and lands. And so I thought it would be appropriate to start with them. And so looking at our region from, I'm defining our Humboldt region from Little River all the way down to Centerville Beach. If we look at the waters in our area, there's about 35 miles of open ocean or outer coastline and 165 miles of inner coastline that are exposed to sea level rise. Nearly 200 miles of shoreline just in our area that will be essentially the front lines of sea level rise exposure and an area of subject to adaptation planning. So we have a lot of sea level rise related issues that we'll have to be addressing in our region, much more than in a lot of other areas of California. And while we were beginning this, I just wanted to acknowledge that the lands and waters on which we live are unceded territory and traditional ancestral homeland of the indigenous Willets people. We take this opportunity to thank and honor the original caretakers of these lands and waters. They continue to cherish and steward and protect, as I do know that many of us do too. So the sea level rise public forum, the intent or the goal of it is to highlight current regional sea level rise projects. So that you can learn about them, have an opportunity to provide input and hopefully get answers to your questions about these projects. We will be doing one of these forums at the beginning of each semester. So possibly we'll have 4 of these forums during the course of the year. And the format that we're starting off with is I will host the public forum. I will do an introduction, on the order of about 5 minutes. We'll have a special guest who will present a current regional project, and they'll have up to 45 minutes or more to present the project. Then following that, I will interview our guests and ask a few questions, try to get some more information out into the forum, but only for about 5 minutes or so. And then we'll turn over to you, the public. There's more than 175 of you today joining us in this forum. And we want you to utilize the 30 minutes that we've set aside for you to ask questions of Clancy and learn as much as you can and provide input to Caltrans on the Eureka Arcata corridor. And so that's the format that we're proposing. At the end of the session or the forum, we will actually have a poll up, and you can go on to that poll and you can respond and tell us whether or not you like the forum format and whether or not you found the content informative. And so just to give you a sense of the number and range of projects that are going on right now in the Humboldt region. We of course have the Highway 101 corridor project that you're going to hear about today. The county is doing a natural shoreline infrastructure study along the Bay Trail. Humboldt County is doing a regional sea level rise planning feasibility study. There will be a phase 2 adaptation and vulnerability assessment on the Bayside hydrologic unit for the corridor. City of Eureka is doing sea level rise vulnerability assessments in the capital improvement program. City of Arcata is exploring a living shoreline and how to update their wastewater treatment plant. And the Willets tribe are in the process of building a climate change adaptation program, and they're starting off looking at sea level rise of their ancestral waters. And then the Humboldt Coastal Resiliency Project is looking at the 35 to 40 miles of open coast and dune ecosystem that we have and determine how it will respond to sea level rise. And then lastly, the U.S. Geologic Service is doing a coastal storm modeling system that will provide us the state-of-the-art sea level rise viewer and modeling for Humboldt Bay as well as the North Coast. So of these 10 projects, we'll pick one of these and feature them in each of the next 3 forums for this year. And I'm sure before the end of the year, there'll be even more. So just to give you some brief background on sea level rise, I don't know how much you're familiar with the subject or the topic. Humboldt Bay, as it turns out, has the highest rate of sea level rise on the entire west coast of the United States. We've experienced about 18 inches, 1.5 feet of sea level rise over the last century. And that's due to the fact that we have tectonic subsidence. It's not that the ocean is rising faster in our region than anywhere else, but the ground is lowering because of the tectonic work. And the state of California has issued sea level rise projections going all the way out to 2150. And they have done that for each of the tide gauges in California. So we have projections from the low and high emission standards for each decade for the Humboldt Bay, the North Spit tide gauge. So if you want to see how fast sea level rise is projected to occur, the state's provided that guidance specifically to Humboldt Bay. And so just by way of a little background, Humboldt Bay historically was about 1/3 salt marsh and 2/3 open water and mudflat. There was about 8,000 or 9,000 acres of salt marsh around Humboldt Bay. And beginning in 1890, the salt marsh was diked off from the bay and tidewaters were prevented from flowing in there. And the areas was converted into the agricultural lands that we see now around the Mad River bottom, Bayside, Eureka Slough, Elk River, and in South Bay. And so today we have a much smaller bay. You can see the current tidal extent of the bay, and the yellow boundary shows you where the bay shoreline was in 1870. And what has happened is we have inherited a historical legacy of about 41 miles of dikes that were constructed in the 1890s that are holding back tidewater. But if those dikes breach and they no longer function, then they would inundate Humboldt Bay today on a daily basis without sea level rise. The bay, in a sense, would reclaim the 8,000 to 9,000 acres that were diked off from it in the 1890s. And by 2065, the current state projection is for about 3 feet of sea level rise. And this is what that's projected to be the new extent to the bay. And the yellow boundary, again, was the shoreline in 1870. So Humboldt Bay is really a dynamic system. It's undergone some tremendous changes. We have the unique standard, I guess, of having a historical legacy that we have to deal with before sea level rise or the onset of sea level rise. And so in closing with that, I just wanted to let everybody know that next week there is going to be a Humboldt Bay symposium. So if you want to learn more about Humboldt Bay and about sea level rise, as well as the restoration work that's going on in Humboldt Bay, please visit this website. We will put this in the chat room so you have a link, and it'll be on September 28th, 29th, and 30th from 10 to 2:30 if you would like to join that. And so with that, I think everybody would agree that Highway 101 is really the lifeline of the Humboldt region, and it's critical infrastructure. We all use it almost on a daily basis. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Clancy De Smet. He's Caltrans District 1 Climate Change Adaptation Branch Chief. And he's going to share with you Caltrans's activities on the Eureka Arcata corridor. So Clancy, welcome.
Thank you. Make sure I got the right screen. Can everybody see?
Yep.
We're going to have an opportunity for questions at the end. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I won't be able to respond to them right away, but we'll do questions at the end if that's okay. So greetings. Thank you for participating in this important planning process. As Aldaron said, Humboldt Bay is experiencing one of the fastest rates of sea level rise on the West Coast. In fact, the former chair of the California Coastal Commission said that Humboldt Bay was ground zero for sea level rise in California. Here's a similar photo that Aldaron used. As the ocean rises, some of the land around Humboldt Bay is subsiding, causing more problems. The section of US Highway 101, Eureka Arcata corridor, is a priority asset in terms of risk to sea level rise and storm surge and the need for adaptation planning. What is the CAPE? The CAPE is the Comprehensive Adaptation and Implementation Plan to address the impact of sea level rise on local infrastructure. Caltrans is developing and will deliver a plan by December 2025. The County of Humboldt, City of Eureka, City of Arcata, Humboldt State University, and numerous stakeholders will be engaged in the creation of the comprehensive plan. We're in the process of obtaining information regarding landform features, exposure, and sensitivity to sea level rise to inform and prioritize project planning. Our goal is to have a well-informed plan by the stakeholders that also has a high level of interest from the public who we will need support from in order to implement future efforts. Our broad scope for all Caltrans projects comprises our three foundational principles of equity, climate change, and safety. People deserve no less than these three principles to be implicit in their lives. We apply these principles to every aspect of our work. These principles are the heart of everything we do. The critical nature of our work has never been more clear. We are facing a global crisis, as the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change made clear in its most recent report from this past August. It is indisputable that human activities are causing climate change, making extreme climate events, including heat waves, heavy rainfall, and droughts, more severe. California is experiencing increased climate change-related impacts along its highway system due to wildfire, sea level rise, and cliff retreat. These events will only become more severe and more frequent through the end of the century. Climate change impacts along the state highway system are driving the need for statewide vulnerability assessments. Unfortunately, California's transportation sector is a leading culprit in the climate change crisis. The transportation sector is the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions. Our vehicles' tailpipes contribute to California's largest source of climate change, but we can do better. It is reassuring that both our federal and state administrations are on board with sweeping initiatives targeting climate change. The state is working to address impacts of climate change through legislative mandates, including Assembly Bill 32, which is the Global Warming Solution Act. It's a California state law that fights global warming by establishing comprehensive programs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from all sources through the state. Additionally, Executive Order B3015 sets interim target of greenhouse gas emissions 40% less than 1990 to be implemented by 2030. Executive Order 1919 sets goals for all new passenger cars and trucks to be zero emission by 2035. All medium heavy duty vehicles to be zero emission by 2045 for all operations where feasible, all trucks to be zero emission by 2035, and all off-road vehicles by 2035. Additionally, Assembly Bill 1482, the California Tenant Protection Act of 2019, is a statewide rent control law that allowed most residential properties owners to only have 5% annual increase plus the price of inflation as determined by the CPI. And another piece of legislation, Senate Bill 1, the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017, invests approximately $54 billion over the next decade to fix roads, freeways, bridges in communities where sea level rise is vulnerable. Another way we are prioritizing funding for sustainable transportation projects is part of the new climate action strategy known as Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure. The CAPI outlines key investment strategies for investing billions of discretionary transportation dollars annually to aggressively combat and adapt to climate change while supporting public health, safety, and equity. why we're here. So Caltrans was issued a CDP for a project on Eureka Arcata corridor. Yeah, this Eureka Arcata 101 corridor improvement project, which consists of 5 component projects within a 6-mile segment of the 101 highway along the east side of the bay. Specifically, the CDP incorporated 2 climate change related conditions. Special condition 1, which was the sea level rise and flooding impact monitoring and reporting condition, and special condition 2, the long-term sea level rise comprehensive adaptation and implementation plan. As I previously mentioned, the CAPE will be completed by 2025. The plan is required to have sea level rise analysis based on the best available science and monitoring reports. Excuse me. We are eagerly awaiting the data for Humboldt Bay to be added to Cosmos, or the coastal storm modeling system developed by the USGS. One of the key assumptions, or the vision for the project is it's going to be a collaborative effort that implements a strategy of short-term and long-term actions to build resilience, the protection of critical resources via multiple lines of defense, including natural and built features, the creation of community-wide awareness of climate change risks, and adaptation projects are led by local agencies and supported by federal and state partners. Additionally, disadvantaged communities are not disproportionately impacted by flood hazards or the cost of adaptation. Some of the key assumptions are many adaptation projects will depend on the availability of funding. Adaptation projects will need to minimize environmental impacts, and the projects will need to be based on the least environmentally damaging feasible alternative. For example, projects that enlarge or expand hard armoring will be limited under Coastal Act policies. Additionally, sea level rise will require an incremental approach using a combination of short and long-term actions to reduce risk and address future conditions. Also, the corridor is expected to remain in its current alignment for the following reasons. The corridor along the bay provides a direct connection between Eureka and Arcata. Relocation inland would displace communities along Myrtle Avenue and Old Arcata Road and would cause significant environmental impacts. Additionally, relocation would be cost prohibitive, several $100 million. So a combination of approaches will likely be implemented, such as protection in place, raising a fill prism, or reconstruction via causeway by the end of the century. Finally, these approaches will be informed by environmental impact analysis, design and constructability constraints, as well as a feasibility study. Caltrans role. Here's a picture of me. Well, actually, it's a cartoon by Terry Torgerson, and whom I got permission. One of the things I'd like to mention that originally Caltrans was working on this comprehensive plan in a 10-year window. However, the Coastal Commission decided that it would be a 5-year window. And initially, I had a 1-year appointment to my job. Luckily, they're working on making me permanent. The Coastal Commission approved the project, but there is much work to be done with regard to adaptation planning. Caltrans has developed vulnerability assessments and adaptation priority reports for all districts. We also plan to use other studies and the California Coastal Commission sea level rise guidance, as well as their soon to be finalized critical infrastructure at risk guidance. The district climate change vulnerability assessments identify by post mile the portions of the state highway system vulnerable to climate change. The 6 climate stressors studied were change in temperature, change in precipitation, wildfire, sea level rise, storm surge, and cliff retreat. Asset-specific adaptation priority reports evaluate and prioritize at-risk assets within each district based on the vulnerability district assessment. These reports will give the districts a firm understanding of which assets are most susceptible in their district. This knowledge will help districts adapt to climate change through incorporating climate resiliency into project development. some of the assets prioritized were roads, bridges, and culverts. On the corridor, we will be evaluating adaptation alternatives and the feasibility of several alternatives. The alternatives include accommodation, protection, relocation, and they will all be evaluated within the lens of the Coastal Act policy. Here's an example of the current Eureka Arcata corridor project. Like I said before, it consists of 5 component projects within the 6-mile segment along the east side of the bay. We have the Indianola undercrossing and half signal, as you see in pink. We have the acceleration and deceleration lanes in green, cable median barriers, bridge rail replacement, and replacement of tide gates. And I've also put another piece of infrastructure on here, which is the Humboldt Bay Trail, because that's an important part of transportation in this area, and it gets more people out of their cars. Once it's completed, it will be a great asset. And the Eureka Arcata corridor is identified as critical because it is the primary transportation hub between Eureka and Arcata, and there are few alternate routes available. It contains essential utility lines and residential, business, and other amenities that can be affected by sea level rise, storm surge, and flooding. The Eureka Arcata corridor is also vulnerable given its proximity to Humboldt Bay, with several sections lower elevation, less than 2 feet above the mean monthly maximum water level. Most sections along the corridor are of high or moderate risk. There are other vulnerable sections in District 1, including South Bay, Elk River, Clam Beach, Big Lagoon, Freshwater Lagoon, and Klamath and other coastal areas north. Most of you are familiar with last chance grade and the vulnerabilities of that portion of 101. This map shows the sea level rise risk in District 1. The vulnerability assessments found that portions of the state highway, mainly directly abutting the shoreline where bridges cross the bay, are the most susceptible. These areas are at the lowest elevations in the region. The Pacific coastline is susceptible to sea level rise, cliff retreat, and slip outs. The colors show the impacts of sea level rise along Humboldt Bay, including 101 and State Route 255. The red indicates impacts of 2 feet or 0.6 meters. Orange is 3 feet or 0.91 meters, and yellow is 6 feet, 1.83 meters. The gradient of blue shows 2 feet, 3 feet, and 6 feet of sea level rise. Another part of our compliance with the CDP as part of the Coastal Development Permit and the Climate Adaptation Plan is we have to monitor king tides. And as you know, there have been king tides where we've had to close 101. And this could be a more frequent occurrence given the increase in greenhouse gases and our inability to curb them. And as everyone knows, king tides are a tidal event that brings unusually high water levels that can cause local tidal flooding. The Bay Trail. The Humboldt Bay Trail is a network of paved paths connecting the communities around Humboldt Bay. Efforts are underway to complete the 14-mile non-motorized trail from central Arcata to the southern end of Arcata. The trail will increase road safety, provide a low-cost travel alternative, expand recreational opportunities, improve community livability, and promote active, healthy transportation. The trail is being constructed in phases by the cities of Eureka and Arcata and Humboldt County with support from Caltrans, the North Coast Railroad Authority, the California Coastal Conservancy, and others. Construction funding is secure for the final 4 miles of the trail, called the Humboldt Bay South Trail, which extends from the Target store near Eureka Slough to the Brackett Industrial Park near Bayside Cutoff. So now I'm going to talk about some project alternatives. No action is the do nothing alternative, and it's not really an option when it comes to climate change. The feasibility of alternatives on the corridor are important to the process. and the no action alternative is not the preferred alternative. Here's an image of Fern Bridge along the Eel and the junction of 101. It's vulnerable to sea level rise, storm surge, and flooding. Another alternative would be a viaduct or causeway. It's an example that is an accommodation measure, but it's also one of the most expensive types of accommodation measures. We could either span the entire corridor or use a causeway to span portions of the corridor at lower elevation. Here is the Willets Bypass. It was proposed 6 decades ago, and the project costs were between $300 and $400 million. So you kind of get a sense of what we're up against as far as funding. Another alternative would be to raise the road in place. And as you all are familiar, there are a lot of levees along the bay. The levee, in this case, serves 2 purposes. It protects infrastructure inland and serves as an opportunity for people to travel from town to town. Here's an example of a raised road. One of the problems with raised roads when you have sea level rise and storm surge is that there aren't processes available to attenuate the wave action and from storm surge. And so these types of roads can quickly unravel. Another alternative would be a protective berm, which would keep the floodwaters or storm surge on one side of the highway. But as Aldaron pointed out earlier, some of it sneaks around through Eureka Slough. Here's a common example along the bay. It's a protective measure, a berm or a levee. It's often designed with hard armoring, which is often inconsistent with coastal act policies. Another alternative would be living shoreline. A living shoreline is preferable to hard armoring. For protection against flooding and erosion caused by sea level rise, extreme storms, California is emphasizing a design approach called natural shoreline infrastructure, which is defined as using natural ecological systems or processes to reduce vulnerability to climate change related hazards while increasing the long-term adaptive capacity of coastal areas. Currently, the county, Humboldt County and the city of Arcata are working on pilot projects to install living shorelines along US 101. Caltrans staff participates in the county's working group. Lastly, relocation is an alternative that we must consider. For example, the corridor could be relocated to Old Arcata Road. However, relocation inland would have its own set of problems, from traffic increases along Myrtle Avenue to displacement of communities along the route. Now I'm going to talk about a little bit of our ongoing work. We continue to participate with local stakeholders and partners on the corridor. Internally, Caltrans District 1 has created a climate change working group to make sure that climate change adaptation measures and considerations are part of project development and delivery. Additionally, we are working to create more expertise on climate change within the District 1. I have created a sea level rise technical working group to help with the comprehensive plan. To assist in the identification of vulnerabilities throughout the corridor, Caltrans is working with Christina Bewley, a geology graduate student from Humboldt State University, to conduct geologic research and modeling and to assess potential hazards. Christina will evaluate the various impacts of sea level rise through the 3 broad research components: leveling, geologic and geomorphic mapping, and groundwater. Christina's research will contribute greatly to the vulnerability assessment while providing essential data. Aldaron, you should be familiar with this figure. So this shows some maps of the Eureka Arcata corridor, a map showing the highway of interest. It shows north of the corridor, and sea level rise vulnerability ratings are in red. It's basically just the study area where we're going to look at the leveling, the groundwater analysis, and the tectonics. The data that Christina and others at Caltrans will collect will provide a baseline for future research and will inform the development of amendment alternatives. This research will also provide an opportunity for the assessment to be reviewed by scientific experts in relevant fields. Going forward, we hope to build internal capacity so that we can continue to conduct technical analyses and collect necessary data. This image is also from Christina's thesis. It's a geomorphic map of the mouth of Jacoby Creek using 2019 10-centimeter resolution LiDAR hillshade as a reference. As the creek enters the bay, Jacoby Creek, it forms a delta complex that is currently occupied by a salt marsh. 3 low terraces are formed in the delta complex. Here's an image of a king tide. That's my colleague Felicia Zimmerman. We're out on the corridor documenting king tides. The cities of Eureka and Arcata and Humboldt County will continue our ongoing efforts to update their local coastal plan to address sea level rise. Caltrans will be referencing these documents in the planning processes. These documents are consistent with the Commission's direction on how local governments can address sea level rise issues in their local coastal programs consistent with the Act. One of the most important aspects of this whole process is public engagement. This is an image of years past when people could gather in the same room. Now we're virtual. So the public engagement plan will be used to inform and prioritize project planning in that it will align with current planning activities to avoid the duplication efforts. It will provide a range of methods and tools to reach diverse audiences. It will identify how to engage residents, key stakeholders, partner agencies, and affected communities. It will also coordinate outreach efforts with trusted partners, agency representatives, and local community groups. Some of the objectives for the public engagement plan are the following. Cohesive materials, conducting meetings with cross-departmental Caltrans teams, hosting public workshops, participating in complementary planning efforts, implementing a variety of digital and non-digital activities and tools, soliciting and incorporating agency, public, and stakeholder feedback for the plan. The selected methods are designed to provide opportunities for people with different levels of expertise and interest in the process. Like I said, we have regular internal meetings. We're going to create outreach materials that are easy to consume for people to understand. We're going to focus on environmental justice and social justice. And we're going to continue to brief and present to the Coastal Commission. We're going to host public workshops. We're going to coordinate with environmental justice communities, Native American tribes, and continually get feedback through the process. One of our metrics for evaluation is the public engagement process will be assessed according to its ability to reach a broad range of stakeholder groups and achieve targeted objectives, such as the number of participants and responses, the number and range of agencies and organizations participating, the quality of input contribution as determined by completeness and specificity and quantity of input and contribution, demographics of respondents and related Title IV data. Here's a rough timeline of the process. It looks like we're really far along. It just means there's more stuff to do. And we're continually getting better and we're continually learning. I'd like to thank everyone for participating today. And now we'll do questions.
First,
so Aldaron will ask me some questions.
Yeah, I just had a couple of questions. We're getting lots of questions in the chat room, and we'll be able to open up for that. But when do you anticipate holding the first general public meeting?
We're looking at late October or early November.
Of this year. Good.
Of this year.
Cool, cool. And it seems that, between now and 2025, when you complete this project, you will have developed a strategy that you would like to implement for the corridor. Will that become a brand new project before the Coastal Commission for a new coastal development permit?
You mean like some of the other projects along the corridor?
Yeah, like, you know, the various alternatives and stuff. Will you be developing, you know, a short and long-term multi-phase project to implement on the corridor, which essentially becomes the new project? Right now, you're doing 6 projects, you know, maintenance and improvement projects.
Yeah, and some of those 5 component parts are already in construction right now. But yeah, eventually, when we have new feasible alternatives to develop, we will program them and develop them and deliver them.
So there'll be lots of opportunities for the public to engage in the various environmental reviews and permitting and development of the short and long-term projects, it sounds like.
Most definitely.
I noticed in your documents that you mentioned a phase 2 extension of the vulnerability and adaptation study that the county did for the Eureka Slough area to cover the rest of the eastern tidelands, you know, up by Arcata. Is that something that's is in process right now, or will be happening soon?
I think it's at this point it's more theoretical. We're still trying to develop the comprehensive plan. But, you know, one of the ideas that I had after talking to, you know, my leadership and my group is that, you know, the plan that the county did was only phase 1, and they only did, you know, the Eureka hydrographic area. And it would be nice if we had more information of the rest of the corridor so that we can make better informed decisions. And, you know, part of my hope is that Christina's project helps with that data gathering and implementation of the plan. But yeah, right now we're not implementing phase 2.
Well, I believe the corridor, you could divide it into an upper section north of Break Cut and a lower section south of Break Cut. And the southern section in the Eureka Slough, I think is more vulnerable to sea level rise than the northern section. So it would make sense to be working there first and doing that. One of the things I was wondering, and you know, in addition to Caltrans doing the sea level rise planning and work on this corridor, there's other entities, you know, that essentially are utilizing the corridor or would benefit from any activities that you develop for sea level rise, such as, you know, utility infrastructure, PG&E with their natural gas lines that parallel the highway, optical fiber lines, wastewater treatment lines, you know, going out to the Jacobs Avenue area, and even municipal water lines. Is there any, have you made any outreach or attempt to bring in some of these other utility providers to have them share some of the burden of creating essentially what could become a transportation and utility corridor?
Not yet, but that's part of the plan. I mean, that's one of the key components is, you know, as you know, property ownership along the corridor is a patchwork, and there's a lot of things in the road and in the right of way that we have to deal with and accommodate. And so that's on our radar.
Yeah, it seems like definitely will complicate the planning part of it. I just with PG&E's right away and trying to integrate them, and they don't own any of the property either. They just have a right of way, and so you know, it'll get. But I'm just thinking there's some other deep pockets that maybe could join forces with Caltrans to help with the planning, you know, and the development of alternatives. And so looking at some of the other areas of 101 that are potentially vulnerable to sea level rise, like, you know, say the freshwater lagoon right there on the beach, you know, where the highway's going, or Clam Beach or Big Lagoon. Is District 1 going to be developing vulnerability studies for those different segments? Is that something that you envision doing in the near future?
Yeah, I think if you could, you know, duplicate me several times, we could get there. But yeah, no, in all seriousness, you know, one of the reasons that I created a climate change working group within Caltrans is so that in the early phases of project initiation documents and scoping documents, that these issues are brought to the front before a project gets to a certain point where it's cost prohibitive to incorporate these things. And so, you know, one of the cool parts about my job is I'm already participating in these groups. They're you know, our asset managers are having regular meetings, and you know, like I said in our early communication, every time there's a climate change question, somebody asks me. And so it's a kind of it's a good problem to have. You know, I don't know all the answers, and I'm not the you know, foremost expert, but I learn something new every day, and I'm a good listener, and I know how to communicate with people.
Great. Well, thanks for the presentation. There's a lot of information in there, and there's a lot. This is definitely going to be in the forefront of people's minds going forward. So I think this would be a great time to open up for questions from you know, the audience. And Kim, I was wondering what would be the best way for the public to ask their questions? Would it be through the chat? Should I just read from the chat, or is there another way of doing that, Kim?
Read from the chat.
Yeah, just read from the chat.
Okay, I'll read. So we've got some. Hey, let me do that.
Ron, this is Brad. I've also been trying to answer some of the questions in the chat as they go along.
I see that.
Thank
And
you, Brad.
Clancy, if you could put on the screen slide 27 for a few minutes, somebody wanted to see that.
Okay.
Aldaron, are you actually going to read the questions out loud and then have him answer them, or how are you going to do that?
I will do that. I'm just scrolling through them to ask some of the questions. So one of the questions was asking for this slide to show the areas that sea level rise impacts to the state highway around the bay. So,
Can folks see that?
Yes.
okay.
You can. Okay.
Okay. So
Clancy, I
This
don't know
image
if
is
you can
taken
make
from
it.
our.
I don't know if you can make it
Bigger?
bigger though. Yeah.
I'll try. So 27. Is that better?
Yes.
cool.
So this image was taken from the District 1 vulnerability assessment, which is available on our website. And we can link it to the Humboldt Bay Sea Level Rise Initiative website repository as well.
Clancy, I did put the link to the vulnerability assessment and the adaptation priorities report in the chat.
Oh,
So-
thank you, Brad.
So it looks like 101, the southern section of 101, south of Bay Breakup, is definitely vulnerable to earlier levels of sea level rise than the upper level from Breakup to Arcata. But it also looks like over on Small Boulevard or Highway 255, there's also some pretty low segments in that
Definitely.
area too. And so are you looking at Highway 255 at, while you're doing the Eureka Arcata corridor? It seems very similar and it's in close proximity.
It's not within the scope of what we're trying to do for the comprehensive plan, but I will admit that it certainly is related and has similar vulnerabilities.
And Clancy,
It'll just be another
Clancy
course.
actually has two full-time jobs. One of them is working on the Eureka Arcata comprehensive plan. The other is doing the district-wide assessment. So while he's doing that, he's also tasked with looking at other locations, both in Humboldt County and in the other three counties. Well, yeah, all three counties that comprise the district. And so, yeah, we'll be looking at 255, but it won't be part of the CAP, the CAIP that he was describing before, because that is specific to the project between Eureka and Arcata.
So it'll be a separate assessment that you're doing just district-wide.
Right.
Okay. And
That map shows yellow right near 4th Street and Broadway in Eureka. What's the plan for that part of 101?
can jump in, Clancy, if you'd like.
Yeah,
So
that'd be great.
you're quite correct. And the reason is because of the elevation of that section. The section right there at the turn and the section near what we call the balloon track is all low enough that it has the potential to be inundated. Anything that we do has to be done in conjunction with the city, because it's clear we can't elevate Broadway if the city doesn't go up with us. So we'll be working closely with the city of Eureka on that. All of these things have to be integrated. There was a question earlier about that. One of the things we found out when we started our studies on the Eureka Arcata corridor was that 70% of our facility was protected by somebody else's berm. So if we don't all work together on it, we're going to be inefficient and probably ineffective.
Am I understanding this correctly, that the red is the ones that, areas that get impacted if it rises 2 feet? And the
Yes.
yellow is if it rises 3 feet, etc. So that
Yes,
the most
except that
dangerous.
it's not necessarily that they're impacted. It's that we need to do the assessment. The vulnerability assessment and the adaptation priorities didn't actually go out and study the bridges. You'll notice the bridges are both in red. The reason for that is those facilities were built in the late 70s and they have to be analyzed to see how they're going to withstand the changing sea level. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to fail. They just have to be assessed.
Okay. So they may fail or they may not fail, but meantime, we better look.
Which just
Well,
means
they're not
that
going to fail now, and we'll be assessing them before the potential for failure exists.
Yeah.
I think it
Right.
shows what areas are at risk and exposed sooner rather than later. And so these would be the areas that where the attention would want to be devoted first, is the areas in red. And again, this project is just the Eureka Arcata corridor. It's not looking at South Bay, which is also vulnerable behind dikes and across low-lying former tidelands. But Caltrans has projects or construction projects in this reach, and as per their permit conditions, that's why they're doing the vulnerability assessment and planning in this corridor. Somebody was asking if they wanted to know, are you taking into account that there's a number of tideland restoration projects that are occurring, along the corridor, are being planned along the corridor, as well as, down in Elk River and South Bay. Do those tideland restoration activities, do they help build resiliency for the highway?
I would think so. Because if you have more wave attenuation because of salt marsh or other restoration projects, we're going to have more protection of our infrastructure in those areas. And so we definitely are following all of these restoration projects closely.
Mm. One of the people was this pointing out, we don't really have a whole lot of time for planning, given, the state's projections for sea level rise, that we could see 3 feet by 2060. That's only 40 years. And as you pointed out, the Willets Bypass took almost 6 decades to plan and build and implement. Are you hoping that construction in phases of these different alternatives is something that you'll be able to achieve in that time frame?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're further along than we were when Willets Bypass was envisioned, and we're more dynamic. And I think we're gonna do the right thing, and we're gonna find the way to fund it. But we're competing with all the other places in California that are also vulnerable, and we don't have quite the population or vehicle trips to make as much of a dent in the state budget or the federal budget, for that matter.
And if I can add to that, Aldaron, the Willets Bypass was certainly not a typical project. Our normal projects take 8 to 10 years to deliver, and our real challenge now is to take what we're learning and planning and fold it into existing projects. So rather than having separate climate change projects, we build things in places where we're building projects now that make the facilities more resilient.
Okay. Christine Stevenson wanted to ask a question verbally. Are you still?
Very good. Actually, husband and wife here, Christine, set this up so that we could both see what was going on. My question is based on something that we saw in one of those earlier studies. We were visiting here at the time, and in our motel, we took we turned it on and saw the results of a county study or whatever it was. And what they showed raised a question for the possibility even of making all of this area safe, and it still sticks in my mind. What they showed was a group of theoretic property owners along a section at risk, and they showed a whole long line of about 8 properties, with one of those properties not wanting to put up a berm or anything to protect their property. And the comment, as I took it, was that this hole in the Samoa levee, if you will, was breached at the point where the water can flow in about where Fields Land, opposite Fields Landing, I guess, somewhere in through there. Now, we live in the area now and in Cutton. And so all of this does not, that I see on your display today, does not show that break in the levee there where cruise ships perhaps came through at one time or whatever it is. Now, until that's closed off, it seems to me we're very much like that one property owner who didn't want to put up a berm, and therefore the thought was all the water that wanted to come ashore would, and fill up the area behind the whatever structure obstacle was installed. And that hasn't been addressed that I've noticed. And so perhaps you could address that?
Sure. The mouth of Humboldt Bay is dredged, so it's not going to close in between the north and the south spit. We actively, as humans, dredge that area.
Yeah, the jetties, or the north jetty in the north spit where it connects to the jetty, is vulnerable to sea level rise. You know, as we get 1 and 2 meters of sea level rise, they're going to have to build up the elevation of the north spit. And I don't know if they'll have to re-engineer the jetties, but the Army Corps of Engineers is in charge of maintaining port access and the entrance of the harbor. So the question is, will the sea level rise overtop the south spit or major portions of the north spit? And U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has been doing a 5-year study of the coastal dune ecosystems and they just completed the 5 years of surveying, and they are now doing the modeling, the sea level rise modeling, to determine the vulnerability of the spit. So we will have them as one of our guest presenters, and we'll learn more about that topic. Somebody asked a question about whether the sea level rise planning that you're doing in the corridor, is it sufficient to address tsunami vulnerability also?
Oh man, that's a great question. I don't know. I have to get back to you.
Okay. And, one question that kind of keeps popping up in a different context is that people want to know why the Indianola project is going forward before you've done the sea level rise assessment and planning for the corridor, the larger corridor area. So I was just wondering if you could address the sequencing of that.
I do know that it's being designed to accommodate sea level rise, but I don't know the context of Brad. I mean, I'm sure Brad does. I'm gonna take a lifeline and pass to Brad on that one.
The short answer is that project was begun long before we were tasked with this, with the sea level rise issue. It's been a project for, a long number of years, but the structures that are in that project were modified, in fact, during the design process to make them accommodate the sea level rise that's anticipated. Now, that doesn't deal with the roadway, because the roadway is still going to be too low. And that project really didn't touch that. But any structures that we are building as part of that project are designed to accommodate the anticipated sea level rise. The real question is, what do we do with the rest of the corridor? And that's what Clancy's been tasked with working on.
So I would assume that given that you're doing the sea level rise adaptation planning work for the rest of the corridor, that would be a precursor to actually implementing, some sort of resiliency project in the future.
Exactly.
So if we started devoting the funding or creating a funding stream to the corridor, hopefully you'll be able to maintain that funding stream and actually implement those projects. So,
And Aldaron, you bring up a really good point, which is all of this is dependent on finding the money to do it. And that's, we're a bit ahead in planning in terms of finding the money. This current funding cycle is the first time there's been any money in the state transportation budget to deal with climate change issues. So we've been doing it using basically, culvert repair jobs and that type of thing. But this is the first time there's actually been money that's devoted to climate change issues, which is a good sign.
There's some new legislation that's being passed. I think SB 1, it looks like it's going to the governor's desk, which will help provide funding for state agencies to be doing sea level rise adaptation planning. I hope that Caltrans will be in there securing funds, to focus in our area. We don't have the population, but we sure have an awful lot of miles of vulnerable shoreline that we need to address up here. So one of the questions that was asked is, how could we in the general public support your activities and such as making sure you get the funding to be able to do the work?
I see Clancy's going to let me take that one, so I will.
Yeah.
So it really just is all of the agencies have to be working together, and the people in the area have to encourage all of the agencies to work together, because it's going to be Caltrans can't build a road to nowhere. So if we build a road that will handle sea level rise, and the city of Eureka, as an example, doesn't deal with sea level rise for the community, then we're connecting something that doesn't exist. So we all have to work together, and we've recognized that for years, and we're doing our best to try to work with all of the other agencies that are out there. So if you hear of anyone who's not working, then that's the time, especially in local politics, to apply pressure. Just make sure that we're all working together.
Okay. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about is that a lot of the focus has been on the bay side of the 101 corridor, where the railroad is and the new Bay Trail is going. And certainly, the bay side is a real dynamic aspect that's threatening the highway. But also on the east side of the highway, where we have the dike form or tidelands, there's many miles of dikes that are actually protecting Highway 101 from being exposed to tidal inundation because of those dikes. Obviously, Caltrans doesn't own those dikes, and a lot of people are trying to restore those dike former tidelands. Has Caltrans any plans to get involved with those dike former tideland owners and help possibly in securing sediment supply, maybe the dredge material from the navigation and the harbor entrance to be used in some of those diked tidelands that would protect Highway 101 from the east? So have you made any outreaches to those property owners to try to help them fix up or enhance their dikes to continue to protect the highway from the east and possibly restore former tidelands and wetlands?
We certainly did.
I'm not aware of it.
Well, the county study was looking at those folks and the berms on the back side of the highway, the east side. And we were part of that study and worked cooperatively with them. We recognize that the danger is not necessarily only from the bay side, that we have to deal with the entire thing. We have not yet been working with the folks that maintain those berms, however.
Yeah. It would just be, I know the Wildlife Refuge has tried to do some tideland restoration down there in the White Slough, right adjacent to Highway 101, there by the Tompkins Hill off-ramp area. And it was only 40 acres, but they had a hell of a time trying to find enough fill material in order to restore the tidelands. And that would be a living shoreline that would be protecting, the west side of the highway. And it's just something that, maybe with Caltrans, with your muscle, in some way you could influence or work with the Army Corps of Engineers to, to divert some of that dredge sediment that they're just taking offshore and dumping, and somehow use it along the 101 corridor on those dike former tidelands to raise elevation so they could support, and provide protection. It's just one of the questions is would you be willing to get involved with doing that?
Yeah,
Certainly would be willing.
Brad and Clancy, use your muscle.
Hey, Whitney, yeah, like I've got muscle with the Army Corps. But I'm glad you brought that point up at down by CR, because I remember there was a breach in the dike down there, which brought the border directly up against the highway.
Yes.
And it highlights to me the reason that we have to keep working together, because, if we do something, for example, if what we build is a viaduct, then we're basically abandoning everybody else to their own devices. So it has to be a collective effort.
Yeah.
And I know that the Harbor District was working on a dewatering plan for dredge spoils, so that they could employ beneficial reuse, but I don't know where the economics of that project are at this point. And so we're interested in it. It's just sometimes those dredge materials can be contaminated.
There's that, and I think there's also just rewriting the federal laws that mandate that they take it offshore or take it to the cheapest disposal site that's available, rather than putting it to the highest and best use, which is, could certainly be used in restoration and building resiliency to sea level rise. But I think that's something we'd need to work on. Some people have been asking about being able to get copies of the presentation. I believe that all of the materials that are presented today will be accessible if you go to the OLLI Brown Bag Luncheon website, and you'll be able to access the recording of this session, the questions asked in the chat room, as well as copies of the slide presentations. And, Clancy, is there anything else, or Brad, anything else that you would like to offer up for people to help them have a better understanding of what you're embarking on, and what their roles or how they will be able to participate going forward?
I would say we need people. We need to find ways to avoid fatigue of this issue. There are a lot of people working on this, and there are a lot of different groups. But we got to keep the Sisyphean task moving forward, and I think people are going to be really important to this process. And experts.
Do you envision forming a general public stakeholder group that might meet on an every monthly basis or something like that, where maybe there could be members of the public or special interest groups appointed to that sort of thing, so you have a consistent sounding board, to get input from, or are you envisioning just hosting annual or biannual workshop and anybody would attend?
Well, it's all sort of new for Caltrans, and we're trying to accommodate all of those things. I mean, I'd like to see something like that, but right now my main focus is accommodating this comprehensive plan. And as I progress in this role, we're gonna fold more things in and include more adaptation and vulnerability assessments and the public as well. And so I'm interested in it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Brad lets me.
Well, we hope so. There's one other question that I skimmed over, but I wanted to go back to, and people were, someone had asked, have you looked at, the vulnerability of the various alternatives, to earthquakes? We do live on the Cascadia subduction zone, and we do have earthquakes. And is a viaduct less safe than an elevated berm, or I mean, are you looking at those sort of things?
I did try to answer that a little bit in the chat, Aldaron. Essentially, it's very much a site-specific analysis, but generally speaking, structures are more vulnerable to earthquakes than earthen berms, and so we have to take that into account. Okay.
So, we've got three more new messages down here at the bottom. Let's see. Could you discuss the causeway option in further detail, how the Indianola bypass would align with the causeway?
Well, like I said before, the likelihood is going to be sort of a hybrid of projects. And so, I doubt we would build a causeway that connected to that overpass unless it was feasible. And so we're going to look at areas that are more vulnerable and would be more appropriate for a causeway. And so I can't say right now. We're still in the process of studying the feasibility of all the alternatives.
It would seem that, that sea level rise is going to manifest itself as king tides and the lowest sections of 101, say down there by Jacobs Avenue and other areas, that as king tides maybe overtop the dikes on Fay Slough or overtop the railroad and start to flood some of the lanes on Highway 101. Is there a threshold of how many times king tides interrupt the traffic and cause, flooding results in stopping the traffic, or is there a threshold of duration, how long you would have to shut down the highway when that would trigger building one of the phases? Have you got targets that you're looking for? Because, it's incrementally going to grow and it's all going to start happening first with king tides.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer one of those questions pretty easily. The coastal development permit that we were granted from the Coastal Commission basically said that if we had 4 events in 1 year, we'd have to come in for an amendment, which would mean we'd have to have a more advanced plan of what to do in those instances. And I remember in January, I was presenting to the Coastal Commission, and Supervisor Wilson asked me a question about closing the highway and how we change our expectations to be able to get wherever we want all the time. And I think that, we're going to have to prepare for times when we close routes. And I know that Brad talks about an example in Mendocino of a road that we close every once in a while when there's flooding. And so, it's going to be something that we're going to see more, as we've discussed, and it's going to be something that we're going to have to employ more. If that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, that does. It just seems that you're not going to rebuild the whole corridor all in one swell sloop. You're going to do it probably in phases, and I was just trying to figure out, how bad does it have to get before you actually start, the construction of one of the segments, or whether you address the northbound lanes versus the southbound lanes, or just how you would go about it.
Yeah, it's a complicated problem.
It's not easy. It's not easy. So if there's any more questions from the public, or let's see. I think we've covered, quite a bit of stuff, a lot of territory. I know that you're focused on this one. This is where your coastal development permit is. I think that you'll probably have just as much interest when you start looking at Big Lagoon, what you're going to do there, or what you're going to do at Freshwater Lagoon. Or I know in an earlier sea level rise stakeholder forum that was up in the Trinidad area, there was a number of comments, people wondering about what's going to happen with Clam Beach. If that got inundated, they would be completely cut off. And then, when you look at 101 going north from, I don't know, maybe Novato, it doesn't really reach the ocean again until it gets to South Bay on the wildlife refuge. And so, I hope that we are a major focus for Caltrans with sea level rise up here, just because of all the shoreline that we have. That and South Bay is definitely much lower than the Arcata Bay. Just tectonically, it's dropping faster. So we hope that you guys get the resources and opportunities to look at these other vulnerable areas, like Highway 255 is really something people are going to want to look at. So we'll look forward to getting continued updates from you guys, and we'll invite you back maybe in another year or so, and you can give us an update, or whenever you would like. But if there's no other questions from the public, we still have some more time. But if not, I'd like to share my screen again if I could. And let's see. And I had one last thing for the slideshow. Let's see. Trying to get. Oh, I guess I'm not sharing my screen. Can you see that?
Did you have a poll?
We do have a poll, and I wanted to. Can people see the screen?
It says
Yes.
slideshow, resume slideshow.
Okay, and so I wanted to, in closing, wanted to let folks know that there's other resources available for learning more about sea level rise in our region. HSU has created a sea level rise initiative, and their website is right here on the screen if you want to go to it.
Aldaron is actually showing like a little snippet of something else.
Ah, okay. I guess it's not working. Well, anyways, I will just delete that. Let's see. Now is it showing it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. As I was saying, HSU has a sea level rise initiative that it's created and has a website, and it's right here, humboldtslri.org. And we've linked up with the Humboldt State University and created a digital commons, and it's a depository for all of the sea level rise documents that have been produced for the Humboldt Bay region. And all the GIS databases that we've been able to secure are stored in this digital commons. So if you want to find copies of reports, this is something that will be maintained by the university institution, and we'll continue to augment and add on new reports as we can. And we were going to do a poll, and I'm not sure how to explain that. Can you explain that, Alexandra?
So I'm actually going to launch it right now, and two questions should pop up on your screen. And if you can just answer those so we can kind of get some feedback from everybody.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you for doing that.
Also, just a reminder, recording is going to be out hopefully tomorrow afternoon or Wednesday, and you can find them. I'm going to put the link in the chat again, and it's an archive that OLLI has, and there's a bunch in there, so you can also look through the ones we've had in the past.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is our first forum on sea level rise for the Humboldt region. And thank you, Clancy and Brad, for stepping up and being our first guests. And this is a topic that everybody was really interested in. So we thought it was a great way to kick off the public forum process. So again, thank you for joining us.
And I want to thank the
thanks for having me.
presenters on behalf of OLLI for conducting this great presentation, which was obviously of great interest to everyone. And to let you know that next week on September 27th, same time, same station, we're going to have a presentation on understanding Alzheimer's and dementia with John Schumann from the Alzheimer's Association. We look forward to seeing you there, and we hope to see you again in the winter session for our next session on sea level rise.
Thank you,
so
everybody.
much.
Thank you.